The instant her knees gave way on the frigid, checkered floor of the diner, the world outside her pain seemed to clamp shut. The room seized, a moment of profound, unnatural silence where time itself seemed suspended. Plates destined for hungry mouths froze mid-arc, coffee cups rattled violently in the grip of elderly hands, and the constant, abrasive hum of the fluorescent overhead lights swelled, somehow drowning out the frantic, frightened pulse drumming in her own ears. She had only dared to ask for scraps for her children, not some grand gesture of charity, and certainly not pity, simply a few warm morsels to carry back to the cold dread of her empty home. Yet, instead of the small measure of human kindness she craved, she was met with a brutal, callous shove from a rough hand that propelled her onto the tiles, her fragile dignity scattering like spilled sugar across the grime of the floor. In that agonizing instant, the scraping pain of her fall was secondary. It was the crushing, suffocating weight of shame that defined the moment. Before this narrative pulls you even deeper into the stark reality of Mara's struggle, if you are someone who fundamentally believes in the power of simple kindness, the necessity of second chances, and the profound importance of standing up for those who genuinely have nothing left to lose, we ask you now to please take a moment to like this video, share it immediately with someone in your life who desperately needs a spark of hope today, and comment your deeply felt thoughts below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, Kindness Corner, and tell us in the comments exactly where you are watching from, because true compassion recognizes no borders or boundaries. Her name was Mara Collins, and life had been systematically stripping away her stability long before she ever had the courage, or desperation, to step inside that diner. Just 1 year prior, she had inhabited a tiny apartment, a space that still smelled comfortingly of fresh laundry soap and the quiet warmth of whispered bedtime stories. She held a grueling night job cleaning corporate offices, and her 2 young children still possessed the absolute certainty that their mother could mend anything broken. Then came the brutal wave of layoffs, followed inevitably by the harsh, official white of rent eviction notices taped to her door, culminating in the silent, terrifying ritual of watching her kitchen cupboards empty faster than her reserves of hope. Mara did not surrender easily. She walked miles every day, seeking any employment she could find, swallowed her fierce pride while waiting in line at food pantries, and became an expert in the horrifying mathematics of stretching a single, diminishing loaf of bread to cover 3 long days. But that morning, her youngest boy had woken crying with a raw, gasping hunger so profound his face turned crimson, and something deep inside Mara finally snapped. She gathered every sliver of courage she had left and walked into the diner, clinging to the desperate belief that begging for leftovers destined for the trash would somehow be easier than watching her children drift back to sleep hungry once more. The diner enveloped her in a temporary illusion of warmth, thick with the smells of stale grease and robust coffee. For a fleeting second, it felt like sanctuary. The cracked vinyl booths were populated by the morning regulars, people whose life stories were etched into the deep wrinkles around their eyes. Patrons who came every single morning because routine was the only thin thread preventing them from unraveling entirely. Behind the high, chipped counter stood Ronan Keller, the manager, a man perpetually hardened by years of small-scale control and a simmering, toxic bitterness. He registered Mara not as a desperate mother, or even a human being, but merely as an offensive disruption to his carefully managed establishment. When she quietly whispered her shameful request, asking only if there was any food that was certainly going to be thrown away, Ronan's face instantly tightened into a mask of cruel irritation. He immediately perceived weakness and made the conscious, deliberate decision to crush it. His voice rose sharply, his temper flaring disproportionately, and before anyone could truly process the sudden violence of the moment, his hand was roughly planted on her shoulder, shoving her backward as if she were nothing more than garbage that needed immediate disposal. Mara stumbled, her palms instinctively scraping raw against the tiles, her entire chest burning with a humiliation that felt physical. She desperately tried to form an explanation, but fear had tightened its cold, relentless grip around her throat, strangling the words before they could escape. The entire room remained locked in silence, a dreadful, heavy stillness. Not because the patrons agreed with the manager's action, but because the contagion of fear spreads exponentially faster than the slow growth of courage. Some instantly averted their eyes, Others stared in stunned disbelief, and a terrified few merely clutched their coffee cups tighter, silently wishing they could vanish into thin air. Ronan's anger metastasized, feeding on that very silence. He felt instantly powerful, entirely justified, completely convinced that he was heroically protecting his petty business from someone he had already deemed irredeemably lesser. He was so consumed by his own petty tyranny that he utterly failed to notice the front diner door slowly swinging open behind him, or the subtle, distinct shift in the very atmosphere when the weighted sound of heavy, worn leather boots stepped inside. Outside, a group of riders had stopped for their morning breakfast, their powerful engines cooling and ticking quietly in the vast asphalt parking lot. These were not the monsters conjured by the public imagination when they saw leather vests adorned with patches and sleeves covered in vivid tattoos. They were men and women who had mastered the tenets of loyalty through brutal, real-world hardship, who profoundly understood what it meant to hit rock bottom and then be hauled back up by someone who stubbornly refused to let go. Their imposing leader, Elias Monroe, had lived a life that had taught him precisely how agonizingly thin the line was between simple survival and absolute, soul-crushing despair. When they walked in and instantly registered the sight of a woman crumpled on the floor, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face, something ancient and absolutely unbreakable stirred within the group. They did not rush forward. They did not shout or create a scene. Their mere collective presence immediately and irrevocably shifted the entire balance of power within the room. Elias calmly took in the appalling scene with a measured stillness that instantly made Ronan profoundly uneasy. The manager's manufactured anger faltered, dissolving the moment he realized he was no longer the dominant or most respected force in that space. The bikers stood quietly, forming a silent, unspoken wall, their eyes fixed on Ronan, not with overt threat, but with an unwavering, damning judgment. The silence that followed became instantly unbearable. Mara slowly pushed herself upright, her hands trembling violently, her heart hammering so loud she feared its sound alone would betray her remaining weakness. She braced herself, anticipating more cruelty. Instead, she felt a profound change filling the dense space, something unexpected, warm, and utterly steady. It was respect. The truth of her desperate situation spilled out naturally, without anyone needing to raise their voice or demand an explanation. The bikers learned why Mara had walked into that diner. They learned about the small, hungry children waiting patiently at home. They learned exactly how easily and mercilessly life had turned its back on her. Each word spoken stripped away Ronan's pathetic sense of authority until he physically seemed smaller than the cheap fear he had tried so hard to impose. The regulars finally began to stir, the heavy weight of their collective guilt finally loosening their tongues, and courage, though late to arrive, bloomed strong and true. One person stood, then another. The room that had been paralyzed in silence just moments before began to breathe again, exhaling the tension. Mara felt the dramatic shift before she could cognitively grasp its meaning. Hands reached out to help her to her feet, hands that were gentle, not rough, treating her as if her life and worth truly mattered. Food instantly appeared on the counter. Plates were silently filled without a single word being asked. Someone pressed a thick coat into her hands, having quietly noted the threadbare thinness of her sweater. The bikers demanded nothing. They simply remained, their formidable, quiet presence serving as a constant, potent reminder that cruelty can only thrive when decent people choose to stay silent and look away. Ronan retreated shamefully behind the counter, his brittle authority utterly dissolved, his heinous actions exposed under the merciless, unforgiving truth of common decency. As Mara sat slowly eating, tears finally fell into her food. But this time, they were not tears of shame, but of profound, cleansing relief. For the first time in countless months, she felt truly seen. She felt like a mother again, capable and loved, not a failure cast aside. The bikers shared the space with her, not positioning themselves as heroic saviors, but simply as unwavering witnesses to her innate strength. They reminded her, without soaring speeches or empty promises, that the world still contained people who would decisively step in when things crossed the line from hardship to outright cruelty. When she finally stood to leave, her arms were heavy and full. not just with the food that would nourish her children, but with something far heavier and immeasurably more precious. Hope. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, and the air felt perceptibly different, lighter, cleaner. The engines of the bikes roared fiercely to life, not in a sound of menace, but in a loud, thundering display of absolute solidarity. A final reminder that sometimes, the help you need arrives in forms you could never possibly expect. Mara walked toward home with steady, deliberate steps, her back straighter and her resolve firmer than it had been in a very long time. That night, her children ate until they were fully satisfied, and she watched them sleep with a heart that felt miraculously stitched back together. She knew instinctively that her struggles were not over. Bills would still be waiting, employment would remain uncertain, and fear would undoubtedly still visit her in the quiet dread of the night. But now she knew one other vital truth. She was not alone, and neither was anyone else who possessed the ultimate courage to simply ask for help. If this deeply emotional story touched your heart, if it reminded you unequivocally that a single act of kindness holds the power to change the entire direction of a life, please take a critical moment right now to like this video, share it widely with someone who desperately needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so that more essential stories like this one can continue to be told. Before this video concludes, we have one special, simple request for you. Please comment below with just a single word that accurately represents what this story made you feel, because your profound words might be the exact encouragement someone else watching is tirelessly searching for.